on to illustrious careers. John D. Clifford Jr. was a Bowdoin graduate in 1910. Went to Harvard Law School and studied law with D.J. McGillicuddy, and eventually got his law degree from Georgetown in 1913. He was a federal attorney, appointed federal attorney in 1933, and appointed to the Federal District Court of Maine in 1947. So a very successful career. William Clifford, also a Bowdoin graduate, graduated from Harvard Law in 1914. He served as the city solicitor and was also on the board of Central Maine General Hospital and the chamber here in Lewiston. And notably, 3 of his sons went into law as well. So they had an office on Lisbon Street as well. And of course, even though I haven't always been in the area, I've always been familiar with the name Delahanty, Thomas Delahanty. Began his law career in 1939. From 1974 to 79, he was justice on the Maine Supreme Court. He was Maine Public Utilities Commissioner. And he was married to Jean Clifford. So you can see how some of these major families stuck together. There are many, many more. Okay, there are quite a number more. So if anybody,
his son
his son is
Federal attorney.
Yeah, U.S. attorney.
currently. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's so it's quite a heritage. Like I said, there are quite a number of other ones that, and some of them I could find stuff on, some of them I couldn't. But it's a rich field if anybody has an interest in putting something together on the Irish lawyers of Lewiston. And I think there was a judge at one time down in Portland, and I think he was Irish, and I only think he was Irish because there was a movie by the name of Raising Ned Devine or something like that. A really funny movie, and I think it was Irish made as well. But there was a judge down in Portland named Judge Devine. Yep. Yep. And you know, you can just imagine that you know, somebody muttering that divine justice has just been done. Of course, the other side wouldn't think it was so funny, but yeah, there were also some undertakers that the Irish community tended to use. Again, when you look at the bottom of the death certificates, they tell you who the undertaker was. And Thomas Vaughan was the earliest one that I could find. May or may not have been the earliest, but he was a native of Ireland, born 1840. Came to Lewiston at the end of the Civil War, about 1865. He died just about the turn of the century. If you go into Mount Hope, the Vaughan stones are in and amongst the Irish section there. Of course, Daniel Conley and started in 1914, and he worked his profession here for 46 years. And Thomas Fahey began in 1937, served in World War II in the 4th Armored Division, was a prisoner of war, and 4th Armored was General Patton's his go-to unit, and he died in 1978, relatively recently.
Conley Fahey went into prison.
Yes, they did.
There was a Francis Conley in partnership with Tom Fahey for a while.
Yeah.
I think he was a nephew of, I don't know what his relation was to Dan Conley. There was some relation.
Okay. Yes, I did find Francis's name. I wasn't sure, but I didn't go into the details of the relationships yet.
On Pine Street for a lot of years.
So the political scene. somebody will undoubtedly research and write about this. The Irish, Patrick McGillicuddy was the leading guy here early on, and Patrick worked on the canals and whatnot, and it was his house where the first Mass in Lewiston was said, and he was apparently the first Irishman on the school board, first Irishman on the in city government. And things as you look through the city directories, which we have from a few of the earlier ones in the 1860s, but then you get the consistent year-to-year of the series from 1872 on. And as you look at the lists of names for the city government, it becomes apparent how the Irish came together and began to establish themselves here in the community. And again, remember, most of these people were ditch diggers who had fled a famine, and so they weren't high up on the social scale. So there was the earliest years there wasn't a lot of participation. In addition to some of the difficulties that they encountered between cholera epidemics and know-nothings and just all the other challenges of the 1850s, the Civil War in the 1860s. So after the Civil War, things settled down. They gained a measure of respect amongst in their communities and in the country. They did go to war. They did fight for the Union. So there was a different view of the Irish after the Civil War, somewhat different view. So as far as I can tell, the Irish first got on the Lewiston School Board in 1872, and this appears to be the training ground to some degree. Father Wallace was there in 1880, and by 1885, the Irish were representing 5 of Lewiston's 7 wards on the school committee. In the city government, in 1868, Patrick McGillicuddy was elected. In 1880, there were 3 Irishmen, or at least 3 Irishmen, and in 1885, at least 4. Daniel McGillicuddy was elected mayor in 1887, and the peak really for the Irish in Lewiston politics came in 1893. So this is when the golden age of the Irish in Lewiston was really the 1890s. They had in 1893 they had seven seats, and also had the presidency of the council and the alderman. So McGillicuddy broke some ground for them as mayor, undoubtedly, and they gained more participation and certainly more influence as more people were elected.
John, I'm one who will be writing about Lewiston politics in the late 19th century, and I've been reading the Lewiston Journal, and the Journal doesn't like McGillicuddy. Right.
I encountered that too.
And he was considered by them at least to be the boss of the Democratic Party during that period, late 1880s and 1890s.
Yeah, somewhere I read a reference that the first McGillicuddy block, and I don't know if I have that on here tonight, but it's that was referred to as the Democratic headquarters of Lewiston. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was looking at a couple of his elections for the U.S. Congress, and the difference between, I forget what the other paper was I was looking at. But yeah, the difference between how his race was reported, or whether he was reported on at all, was marked. Depending on who the paper favored. Yeah.
Was it the Journal and the Sun?
No.
Because those were opposite. They had opposite views on a lot of things.
It might have been. I don't recall offhand the dates when the Sun started, but yeah.
Yeah, the Sun started in the late 1800s, and then it didn't merge with the Journal until the 1920s or 30s. it was independent for a while, and then even after it merged, my father would take the Sun, he wouldn't take the Journal, because he didn't like the Journal's editorial politics.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah. Sounds like home.
Yeah, the Irish had two other mayors. William Hines, another lawyer, went to Georgetown in Columbia. He also served as a city solicitor and state representative. And I believe he was also the county attorney. But he was elected in 1913. And then the French took over. In a long series of Franco-American mayors. And then in the 1970s, Robert Clifford was elected mayor in 1971. And he was the son of William H. Clifford and Alice Subaru. Did I pronounce that right? Chagru, okay. And of course, Robert was appointed to the Maine Superior Court in 1979 and the Maine Supreme Court in 1986. So again, Lewiston has a very strong Irish lawyer tradition here. Now the picture of the gentleman is my great-grandfather, Jeremiah Murphy. And Jeremiah came to Auburn with his 6 siblings and his mother in 1872 or 73. And the father had died in Ireland before coming over of tuberculosis. And Jeremiah ran a fish shop on Main Street in Auburn. He had lost a leg as a kid on one of the bridges here, taking lunch to his brother Daniel, who worked in the kiln mill. And Jeremiah had started in one of the shoe shops in Auburn, but then started up his fish shop, and it might have been able to control the wear and tear on his leg better there, I suspect. But of course, in those days when you had an Irish Catholic population, what did you eat on Friday night? Fish. So Thursdays and Fridays were his busy days. My grandmother said that he had 2 wagon teams. Up into her lifetime before eventually getting a little wagon that I seem to recall having seen a picture of it somewhere, or a similar type wagon. It looked sort of like a PT Cruiser, only a little bit bigger. But Jeremiah was at one point was active in the ancient order of Hibernians, which is the Catholic Irish men's group. And they got started in Central Block, building on top here, and that's where they met. In those days, and probably still today, the 3rd floors were often open halls for meetings of different groups. And they got started. The Hibernians got started about 1880. That was the first year they were listed in the city directories. Before the Hibernians, there was a St. Joseph's Benevolent Society, which was a similar insurance and fraternal sort of organization. And they met from 1875 to 1889. They also met in the Central Block. Now the Hibernians grew fairly quickly, and for many years had 2 divisions. At one point in, what was it, in 1885, they started the 2nd division, and one of them had 60, was listed as having 60 members, and the other one had 100 members. So that's and very briefly, there was a 3rd division meeting down on Lisbon Street as well, but they didn't go for very long. And one of the other meeting places was the Union Block at the head of Lisbon Street. And the Union Block's an interesting building, and I have to give you a second thought on something I wrote in the book about the Hibernians. In the Union block was